Ready to get started. Hi, my name is Hillary Kern. I'm the Director of Customer Experience at Guru. I'm based in Philadelphia, and I'm super, super excited today to talk to two amazing folks in the support and customer experience world. We have Anne Raimondi from Guru as well, she's the Chief Customer Officer, and Kenji Hayward, who's the Head of Support at Front. Both of them are based in the Bay Area. So I would love to have you introduce yourselves, and then we'll have each of them talk a little bit more about the products and companies that they work for. And our goal today is obviously to cover the large topic of how to combat burnout in your support team, which we have lots of really great discussions coming up, and we'll talk through kind of what all those factors are going to be. So yeah, I'd love to have both of you introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about your role at your company, as well as a fun fact about yourself.
Cool. My name is Kenji, and I head up the customer support team here at Front, and I've pretty much made a career out of working in support. It's my only job I've had since working in tech, and I love it, and I've grown. And now that I'm here with Front, just looking for better ways to do it, keep improving. And a fun fact about me, I thought about this in my head just now, but I'm going to go ahead and share it. I auditioned for a reality show on Netflix. It's called Terrace House. Terrace, I don't want to mispronounce that. You may or may not have heard of it. If you have, awesome.
That sounds awesome. I'm definitely going to look it up because I love Netflix and binging shows. So.
Hi, I'm Anne. As Hillary mentioned, I'm the Chief Customer Officer at Guru, which means I get to work with our awesome support, success, and marketing teams to make sure we are really helping our customers be successful. And before Guru, unlike Kenji, I've done a whole bunch of different things. So started my career in product management, have worked in marketing, and then spent 4.5 years before Guru at Zendesk scaling operations. So got to work with our awesome global support team there. So I'm very passionate about this topic. I have never auditioned for a reality TV show, though I aspire to. So I wish I could say I had, but my fun fact is probably a little more domestic. We are beekeepers. So we've got 4 beehives in our backyard, though I'm largely only responsible for packaging the honey. My husband takes care of all the heavy lifting on actually maintaining the hives.
That's so good. I'm excited to taste some of it, hopefully one day. And we'll have to bring some out to you, Kenji, to try. Well, thanks so much for joining us today. We're really excited to get going. First, before we start, I'd love to learn a little bit more about, about each of the companies that you work for. So can you tell us a little about Guru, Anne?
Yeah, so Guru is a software solution that brings knowledge that primarily customer-facing teams like support and sales need to do their jobs directly to them when they need it. So if your team works in Zendesk or Salesforce, they never have to leave their workflow. Our browser extension ensures that they have access to everything they need to help a customer or prospect with any questions that might come up. So for example, technical specifications, tips, templates, use cases. And the best part of it is the knowledge is verified by colleagues. So you know when it was updated, that it can be trusted, and that really helps customer-facing teams increase confidence in being able to deliver for customers. So we've got a deep integration with Slack. So we also see a lot of companies use us for internal knowledge management. You don't want to lose all that knowledge in Slack channels. And then we also have a great integration with our friends at Front.
Awesome. Perfect segue. Yeah, Kenji, tell us a little bit about Front.
Yeah, I mean, the way I use Front is a pretty common use case. Front can be used for support. It can be used for any instance where you want to share your inbox with teams. And I think the main difference is we're just really trying to change email. Email hasn't changed in 20 years. So adding these collaboration components and really getting the efficiency. We believe if we can help make your work happier, more efficient, on average, customers save about 6 hours per week per shared inbox. So that's the way we feel like we're giving you back time to work happier and be less burnt out.
Awesome. Cool. So before we start, I wanted to ask one question out to our audience. Just to preface this whole question. When determining what topic we wanted to talk about for this webinar, we kept coming back to how powerful a good support team is for a company, not only for their improving customer experiences, but also to help drive revenue. And as such, it's vital that managers of customer support teams like Anne and Kenji make sure that their teams don't get burnt out, right? Because it's having those constant questions day in and day out, and having to deal with a lot of bugs and problems, every single day. It's challenging, and so we wanted to make sure that if you have a support team that you're managing, that you're not necessarily, that we have the things that can equip you based on our conversation today to prevent burnout in your team, and allow your team to become not only a place to improve the customer experience, but also a team that everyone wants to be on and learn from, because it's a really great team to learn from as far as any career in tech. So the first question, because we're going to cover a couple topics, is of the three things we're going to talk about today. One is how to identify burnout with your support team, how to combat it on an ongoing long-term basis, and then how to structure different roles within your team to support a scaling organization. Which of these are you most excited to learn about today? And that'll help us tailor our conversation. So I just launched the poll, so if you could take a second and respond. Awesome. And then we'll see the results. We've got about 75% of people voted already. Wait one more second. Cool. So right now, it looks like the top front runners, I'm going to end the poll, are the number one thing people are wanting to hear about, right? 47%, which is super close to the second one, is how to structure your team. And we'll definitely spend some time talking about that. That'll be the third topic we hit. And then the second most interested topic is how to combat, obviously, burnout on a long and short-term basis. And then, the first one with only 14% is how to identify it. So we'll just make sure that we tailor our conversation to kind of hit on the last two. Awesome.
That's great.
Okay, cool. Thank you guys for taking the survey. Okay, so we'll go back to, so how to identify burnout, right? We'll keep this one short and sweet, but there's some really great things here. So we'll start with Kenji. What are some signs or behaviors that you should look for regarding burnout, right? Just because you want to prevent it before it's too late.
Yeah, and it's a great thing to bring up, because for me, catching it early is the most important part, right? You don't want to get people to the point where they're fully burnt out, and it's so much hard to reverse that after that. But the three things that I look for, number one is just decreased productivity in general. So if you're managing a support team, maybe what that could look like is just, the numbers from week to week or month to month, they just don't seem to be hitting the same. And a reason could be burnout. It could be the motivation that's not there, that's pushing them over the edge week to week. And then the other thing I look at is quality, because you have the numbers, and numbers can change, but if you just notice overall quality is changing, whether it's quality of responses to the customers, maybe quality of an article you've written, I think those are things to look out for, number one. And then just disengagement would be number two. And the way I like to use this as an example is you have a team meeting, and maybe they're on their phone, or maybe they're just not as interested, on a topic that you're talking about. I think those are signs that you can look for. So making sure that your team's engaged, and if they're not, maybe that could help you to spot that. And then the last one is complaining. And I tread really carefully with this. We all complain. I complain, like we're all human. We vent, right? We talk about things that are on our mind. And I'm more concerned about customer complaints. When you work in support, you help our customers out. I think if I hear anything like, a negative comment about a customer, about an interaction, and if I keep hearing that, that's a big warning sign for me that something's not quite right.
Awesome. Thank you so much. That was super helpful. Anne, what about you? What are some signs? I think, definitely a change in behavior is obviously the first one.
Yeah, Kenji brought up so many good ones to look out for. I also think about looking out for exhaustion, both physical and emotional exhaustion. As Kenji mentioned, we really expect our support teams to be super empathetic to customers. And oftentimes, the bulk of what our teams are dealing with are unhappy customers or customers who are confused or have problems or challenges and want you to fix it right away. And over time, that can lead to empathy burnout. So the complaining that Kenji mentioned, it's if all of a sudden you're hearing less empathy towards customers and their individual issues, that can be a sign that either individuals on your team or your team overall is experiencing burnout. I think there's also something relatively common in support teams because of the repeated nature of the role is if you start to hear people talk about lack of accomplishment or lack of motivation, that like it just doesn't seem like things are changing or we're making an impact, those are all signals to watch out for.
Awesome. Great. Those are super helpful. And I think those are all things that I've also seen on teams that I've worked on. So I can totally, relate. The next question that we have was, which I think you guys both kind of answered this, but what does it look like when your employee is burnout, right? So how can you be sure that it's work-related versus something else? Sometimes people may have a lot going on at home or going on outside of work. And so, if you're bringing that with you to work, you may not be burnt out about the job itself, but it may just be other things. So kind of, is there any deciphering factors?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's always difficult because more and more the line between personal and work is intertwined. Teams are tight. Right. You have social media, you have your friends, from work on Instagram, and it's kind of hard. You have this blurred line of like, where does it begin and end, which makes it really difficult to kind of decide, where is that coming from? Is it coming from external factors or is it work related? So what I like to do in this case is just focus on the things that you're getting from those initial triggers, like we talked about, like the quality of work, or having the reduction, or if there's, the complaints or the empathy burnout. I think focus on those things and keep going on those because those are most likely work related.
Got it.
Yeah, I think the only thing I'll add there is also just to make sure as a manager and leader that you're creating a safe space for employees to share what's going on both at work and outside of work. I think that goes such a long way to make sure people trust you, they can share, they can ask for help. And so those one-on-ones on a weekly or bi-weekly basis, and it's not always easy if you've got distributed teams, but committing to that time just to check in and give your employees space to share what's going on with them, I think goes a long way.
Awesome. No, I totally agree. I think having one-on-ones is something that I found really helpful, across the, whether it's me to my manager or below, either way, I think it's super helpful. And that way everyone can have a time that they know is designated for them to have their voice heard. So the next question is, while burnout can obviously is something that is felt internally by a single employee potentially, how is this potentially going to also impact the team that person's working with and the interactions that they have with customers? Because it's not, not necessarily something people think about that often.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's really important because, obviously you have to care about that employee who's feeling burnt out, they're feeling negative, and that's going to come out in their work, right? Like we talked about the quality and the quantity, but what could potentially happen is, you work in these tight-knit teams, you have your support team, and they're going to hear these things. And if you have newer hires who are, hearing these things said about customers and like they're feeling kind of that almost toxic, contagious burnout, it seems to kind of work that way. And then for me, the worst thing that could happen is you don't catch it early enough, and it's happening to the team, but then the customer gets a reply that they probably shouldn't have, and something we probably should have thought about more before sending. So I think those are a few things to think about. You can definitely have a burnout for one person, but it's most likely if it's related to work and it's related to their day-to-day, and you've got a team pretty much doing similar things, there's a good chance that the rest of the team's feeling something. But if you let that one person go too far, it could become toxic.
Right.
Yeah, that the whole idea that emotions, both positive and negative, are contagious is so important here. I mean, we are all customers ourselves, and think about our experiences when you interact with someone who's really motivated, engaged, and positive, and how you think about that product and brand and company, as well as we've all had experiences where there is something off with the person you're interacting with, and you can't quite tell, but it totally affects your experience as a customer. So as Kenji said, really making sure everyone's empowered on the team to kind of raise their hand and identify when they're feeling it themselves or they see it in a colleague before it impacts your customers. That's such an important thing, just giving permission for your team to kind of ask for help, raise a flag, and kind of stop it before it trickles out across the team or to customers.
I love it. Yeah, I've seen some teams institute like even just like a Slack emoji, right? Like, how are you feeling today? And everyone can post, up or down, or I'm good. Just to have that quick moment to kind of be a little bit more self-aware. So I love that idea. So now that we can identify it, right? The next part is how to combat it, both long and short term. And so when you do catch it, right, when you have a conversation with your employee who's a support rep who is becoming burnt out or is struggling to stay engaged, what are some tips that managers can implement right away for their teams in order to combat this? Kenji, what about you?
Sure. Yeah, I have I have one thing you can actually do today. Today is Tuesday, right? So it's perfect time to start in the week. One thing I do is I send out a weekly survey, but it could be a monthly, it could be biweekly. And basically the survey has just a few questions, and I'm happy to share this out with everybody later on. But the one question I'm always asking first is kind of like you said, how are you feeling? And it's a emoji ranking of like sad to happy, basically a 1 to 5 score. The reason I do that is it's really simple. If they're feeling like a 1, that's probably worth a conversation that you should have after you set the survey out. And I think the survey is great because it supplements when you have these scaling, growing, global teams like Ann talked about. It gets harder and harder to be there and have that pulse check person. So I think that's something every manager, every leader could do if they're not doing it right now. Go to Google Forms, it's free. Create a simple survey. You can use the smiley face, sad face, math face approach. And it's a really easy, fun way to get, that engagement, and people will actually fill it out, and they're usually pretty true to it.
Yeah, I love those. The feedback is so key. I would say things you could do right away is ask for ideas and feedback. One of my favorite questions is if you had a magic wand and you could change one thing, what would it be? And oftentimes you just get the best ideas and answers by asking that. And then, as a leader or manager, you got to act on it. You don't have to act on everything right away, but pick and choose and communicate what you're going to act on. And that makes a big difference because you're moving forward. Another thing I like to do is ban what I call exercises in futility. So if you start to see that your team is repeatedly doing the same thing again and again and trying to fix the same problem again and again, take time to give the team permission to radically redesign how you might approach those challenges. Because again, oftentimes support teams have the very best ideas of what should change and how to change them, but just aren't given the time and resources to do it. So making sure you commit to empowering your team to take ownership and then also have the time and resources to act on it can go a long way in the near term.
I love it. Like a kind of like a hack session, right? For support teams to kind of think through. I know that's something that happens a lot, right? You'll have like the same customer issue or the same kind of workflow, and it just sort of becomes second nature. And something that I think we've seen a lot, specifically at a growing company, right? Is that when someone new comes in, that you start to question like, have we always done it this way because we've just done it this way, or was there a reason? So that sometimes is a good time to try to innovate. So like, let's say that you're innovating, you're asking your team for feedback, you're catching it earlier, but as your company grows and you get bigger and you have new people start and potentially a much higher volume, right? It can start to happen again when you have burnout. Creep back in. So curious kind of what managers can do, on the flip side, to help their team in the long term, prevent this from being a sustainable problem.
Yeah, I think, anytime you're thinking long-term for burnout, you always want to account for the growth. Am I staffed correctly? Have I built out the diversity in the different support roles to support the growth? And I think that's probably the major thing to think about. And then the way to kind of get there is just having that path built out. And I think having that conversation up front is going to alleviate a lot of the potential burnout concerns of where am I going with this role? What's next? What happens in a year? And I think having that conversation early, building out your team and your framework in a way where it promotes that growth and rewards that. I think that's a really great way of winning, having a win-win situation where the agent is engaged, they know where they're going, and they will have a less likely tendency to burn out.
Yeah, I think Kenji brings up some great things around planning and intention. I think of it also in terms of designing roles and designing teams for the long term. So knowing that as your company scales and goes global and brings on new product lines, that you're only going to add complexity, which adds stress to the role, is how can you design the job so that there's as many happy customer moments as there are sort of fixing problems, right? One of my favorite books about building for the long term is called Scaling Up Excellence. And they talk a lot about how as humans, we need 5 positive things to neutralize a negative thing. And so if you think about how many negative or potentially negative interactions a support team is dealing with, as a site breaks down or a product isn't delivered, how can you design in those happy customer moments, because they are part of so many positive customer experiences, and how to highlight those. And then how can you design workload so it's balanced, more balanced between what I think of as like reactive and responsive responsibilities, and then proactive and strategic. So we talked about, taking time out, planning for that, whether that's quarterly or every 6 months, where you're building and changing versus just reacting. And then highlighting success, making it super easy for people to give shout outs to one another and shine a light on all the things that are positive, because we're often too close to the problems, but encouraging and building in systems where you're shining a light on the positives and successes, I think goes a long way in the long term.
Awesome. Yeah, I've talked to a lot of teams across support communities who often will try to highlight someone like in their meeting, or have like, if they have like a company-wide event, kind of talk about an interaction that someone on a support rep has had. And I think just having that moment for them to kind of take the spotlight is huge for them, because oftentimes they're dealing with an unhappy person to start out with. So yeah, I love both of those ideas. So resourcing, thinking about scale, and also shining a light and creating moments to have happy things, outside of all of the issues that customer support has to deal with. Cool. So it's important, right? Not only that your support team feel supported by you as a manager, but also by the broader team. So, this could be management, engineering, product, sales, even, across lots of different departments. So how can you ensure, we actually have a poll question. Wait, hold on. Oh, here you go. I skipped it. How can you ensure that your team's concerns are not only being heard by you, but also by the rest of the organization? So, which I think there's a lot of different ways that this can be done.
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in here. I think so often, especially if support teams don't sit with product or engineering teams, it can be hard to build that empathy. So specific tactical things you can do are, one, make sure every employee from leadership to every role has exposure to support, learns how to take and answer support tickets or chats. A lot of times people feel really overwhelmed by that. So at Zendesk, we would host chat parties, invite everyone in, and experts are in the room, so you can't mess up, but you really get to see the volume of questions and issues coming in. The other thing, if you can as a company, is be committed to actually having support folks sitting next to the teams that are building your product. That made a huge difference when we started to really do that. And I also am a big believer that it's not just one person in the role, because that can be really lonely. So having at least 2 support folks co-located with our product and engineering teams around the world, made such a big difference to bridging that empathy gap and having everyone then be, on the same team and same page in terms of delivering for customers.
Awesome. What about up front?
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with everything. We do something similar. So something we launched about a month ago, it's a program called Support You, to support all the different new hires, who are starting here at Front. And what it is, it's a 2-week comprehensive, product and customer support training program. And by the end of it, they're actually interacting with customers and helping us out, whether it's chats or emails. But that's kind of like the graduation ceremony, and it's something we celebrate in the company. And I think you get a lot of good out of that. You get empathy, obviously built in within the company. It kind of elevates support to, okay, wow, I get it. Like, I understand what you do and why it's so important. And it provides a lot of value. And I think for my team and myself, when I see that happening, it makes me really happy, and it's fulfilling to see that in the team.
Awesome. I love it. So making people be more connected to support by giving them like a day or even a week to like walk around in the support person's shoes. I think that's an awesome idea. And it definitely will allow the, that cross team communication and sort of understanding be much more developed, which is great. So we have a question now for a poll. And this poll is really just to get a gauge in the audience on if you're actually dealing with burnout yourself. So whether this is you, someone on your team, or even someone that you work with that's on a different team, just curious if any of you are dealing with burnout. Oh wow, right now it's like 95% yes. So it's definitely something that people feel. We hear you. That's why we're having this webinar, hopefully, to help answer some of these questions. So yeah, so far 93%. We'll let it be open a little bit longer. Yeah, so it seems like it's definitely a problem that people are feeling either personally or on their team. So hopefully there's some good takeaways today that you can take back with you to your teams, to your managers, and hopefully get some great action items out of this. So our last topic is which was the most interested from the beginning, is how to structure your support team roles in your team and foster career development across support. And this is, I think, a really hot topic. I know personally, a lot of teams that I've been on that have support, sometimes support can sometimes feel like you do it and then what's next? Like I should jump to another team, and it's a little bit kind of discouraging to not really know what other options you have if your company has ideas about it. So would love to kind of hear your feedback around things that you've seen as good structure. So the first question is, what are some things to keep in mind as you're hiring folks? How are you going to know if they're going to be likely a good fit for a support role?
Yeah, this is a really important one for me. I think the longevity and the happiness of the support team, it starts in the recruiting process. It starts as you're looking for your next rock star to join the team. So something more recently that I've discovered is I'm putting a lot more priority on the fit. And when I say fit, I mean, not the perfect fit, not them knowing everything about the product, but does their personality fit with the team? Do they share the same values as us? Because the product can be taught. You can teach somebody Guru,
Right.
somebody Front, and no matter where you go, you're going to have to learn that portion of it, no matter what. But it's more of these intrinsic, intangible things that we're looking for. So that's definitely one thing that I keep in mind as I'm hiring, and I use certain interview questions to dig a little deeper that I'm happy to share.
Awesome. What would be one of your favorite ones?
Yeah.
Questions?
Yeah, my favorite one is, tell me about a time you overcame something difficult, and you'd be amazed on how open people get. People will dig super deep and get really personal to the point where you might be uncomfortable, but just let it happen, go with it. Because what you're going to get is this amazing story of somebody who can overcome X, Y, and Z. And then you look at the bigger picture. The support tickets are going to be nothing for this person. But I'm also looking for the second part, which is more important, which is how did you overcome that? Like I'm so glad that you were able to get through it. But now how have you gotten over it? What do you do to keep yourself in a good place. And I hear things like meditation, I do yoga, I read more, I take walks, and hearing that these people are already so self-aware and they know how to catch burnout, that's a great candidate for me, because I know that they have the tools, they've been through something like this, and they're less likely to burn out because they've been there and they know how to prevent that.
Yeah,
Awesome.
the fit points that Kenji brings up are so important. I think of it as interviewing for fit on purpose. Are they excited about the mission of your company and the problem that you're solving in the world? Fit on values. How aligned are they with your company's core values? For example, at Guru, we look for people who don't take themselves too seriously. And what we mean by that ultimately is people who don't take themselves too seriously tend to be humble and have a good sense of humor. And so a question that we ask to really get to understand that is, to what do you attribute your success so far? And how people answer that question tells a lot about them and how seriously or not they take themselves. I also really like to look for, especially in support, emotional intelligence and a growth mindset. And what I mean by that is like how self-aware are people, and how aware and in touch with their own emotions so that they can be in touch with other people's emotions as well. And then how do they deal with setback and failure? And do they see that as a learning opportunity? So some questions that help on that front that I like to ask are, what would a previous manager say is the area you need to work most on? So that helps to understand if someone is self-aware and if they take feedback. And so then, depending on their answer, what have you done about that? What have you tried to work on and change, and how? People that are really open to learning are then less defensive when they get feedback, right? Because they're always seeking out how they can improve. Another fun one I like to ask is, tell me about a day when everything went wrong and how did you handle that? Because we have all had those days. And so can someone tell that story with some amount of humor, or do they, blame everybody else? Again, that tells a lot about their mindset.
Love it. I love those questions. And now I'm going to be thinking about how I would respond. So more on that next time. So obviously it's important. An important part of building a team and structuring your team is interviewing the right people. But after they have experiences, what's next in their career path? In your experience, do you have any examples of healthy team structures that have worked well in scaling an organization, giving people options kind of after they've had a couple of years of experience in a specific role?
Yeah, definitely. I think, when you start in support, we all go through that traditional tier 1, tier 2, and, very tried and true method. But as you get bigger and as your team, grows more interest, you're going to realize that that's pretty tight to fit everybody into. So the structure that I work with is I always build in flexibility. I know that I'm going to have somebody who's going to be amazing at whether it's, maybe it's documentation, for example, and maybe there's a huge need for it. I want to partner with that person to create that role. And then the other thing that I do is I'm initially talking to the different leads in the company, for the paths that make sense, whether it's customer success or product or, even sales, it could be. But there's so many ways you can go with support because it's such a great place to start. Like you have all this, amazing product knowledge. You can do so much with it. You're really valuable. You've got the right mindset and culture. So you're super desirable. And it's our job to make sure that we nurture that and create these kind of natural paths that you can go. So I guess my answer is there is that initial structure, that foundation, but I always leave room for flexibility to grow because there might be that one person who doesn't see that job position, on the site, but that doesn't change my path from trying to help me or helping them to create it.
Awesome.
Yeah, the idea of planning for flexibility is so important in scaling organizations because then you're able to adapt and move more quickly. I also structurally believe in investing in support operations. So whether it's a person or a small team that helps with planning and the tech stack and evaluation of that and improving processes. And you can definitely have people on the team rotate in who are interested in that. It doesn't have to be completely separate, but making sure you're investing in operations and data and analysis, as well as learning and training. So are there folks who's whether totally dedicated to it or part-time for onboarding and coaching and manager training and product training, just really investing in the learning and development of your team is so critical. And then I think that also helps to make sure people continue to have paths within support, because it is such an important and valuable career. And by seeing that there's opportunities to go deeper or specialize, I think can also help the longevity and not have people burn out and feel like, well, I've got to leave support if I want a sustainable career.
Awesome. No, I totally agree. I think one of the other things that I've seen teams do that I've worked with across support is just, specifically if you have teams that work weird hours, right? You could give someone a project, like maybe they're working on support on hours that don't have as high of a volume. You could give them a project kind of that's a little bit broader outside of support to kind of engage them a little bit deeper and give them something to work on that's, pushing their educational boundaries a little bit. So those are all, I think, really great themes around flexibility, learning and development, so creating roles potentially in support operations. But I think all really good takeaways for this question. So obviously, if you had someone right in a team that you've led who is burnt out, have you ever, used a career growth or development action plan to sort of combat this and to kind of raise the team up and say, like, here are your options? And if you have, kind of, what does that look like?
Yeah, I'm actually literally going through that right now. So it's a very timely question. For Helena, amazing person on my team. She's been, fantastic with the sports stuff. But like I said, she's also really, really great with the content. And we've discovered that that's what she's passionate about. That's what makes her happy, is creating this content, that can be shared with all customers. And I love that. So what we're working on right now is together, we're just coming up with what does the next 3 months look like? What are, how can I get your feet wet? What are projects that you can work on to help you prepare for that, so that I don't just throw you in and set you up for failure, but set you up for success by giving you projects like, managing the help center or writing more documentation for product. And then that way they're gaining the skills along the way. And if they still feel like this is what I want to do, you've already planned for that. And you've created this role that's going to have tons of value for your team, for your company. And you're going to have even more value because you have this really happy person who loves this new role.
Yeah, I love the kind of test and try mentality. Because oftentimes if you are early in your career and it's your first or second job, it can be hard to know, like, well, what do I want to do next? And so I think rotational types of programs can be really great for career development and preventing burnout. For example, rotating and being a team lead to test out if you like management or aspects of management. Because sometimes people think like, oh, okay, the next step is managing, but not everybody should be a manager or enjoys being a manager. So testing that out in a rotational format, or if someone's interested in product management, can they be a product specialist for a period of time, like 6 months, and dive really deep and kind of be that bridge between product management and support for a particular feature or a product set. Those are all great ways to explore, diversify what you do day to day, but then also test it and de-risk. So you're not moving into a role before you're ready for it, or find out once you switch into a role that it's actually not what you want to do.
I love it. Yeah, I was telling them yesterday whenever we were talking about this that I actually wish that I could have done this with like a degree in college. Like I don't like this subject. I want to change to another major, and then you change and you realize you really don't want to be an engineer, and then you change again. So I think doing that specifically if you're new to your the workforce, being able to try out another function at a job is really, really great opportunity for people to get their feet wet, but not necessarily have to, quit jobs and change to an entirely different industry or entirely different department. So really love that you guys both are supporting that.
We are all works in progress.
That's right. That's right. So unfortunately, not everyone has a manager like Anne and Kenji, as wonderful to talk about their career growth and combating burnout. So if you are a support rep, right, what is the best way to approach the subject of burnout or changing, potentially into a different role within support if your manager hasn't brought it up yet?
Yeah, I'm happy to dive in here. The wonderful thing is I think there are so many great resources out there to take that first step as an employee. A site I really like is Rework by Google. They just publish out a lot of the templates that they've developed over time. And one that they share, and we can share this after, is called the GROW model. And it really is a development assessment model with sort of simple questions you can ask together with your manager, or you could do first on your own, even to, again, assess where you're at so you can ask for help. So specifically, the GROW model has your goals. So what's important to you? What do you want to learn and accomplish? And take some time to think about that, right? You might be frustrated or burnt out, but thinking of where you want to head can feel a lot more positive. The second, the R in GROW, is reality, like what's happening today and now, what's working for you, what's not working for you, when are you challenged, when are you bored, and again, sort of that self-assessment. What do you find most rewarding? The third part is options. What could you do now to further build your skills? So this is the part where we talked about, like, can you try something out? Can you get exposure to other teams? Can you spend a little time on content because you're passionate about that? So can you have a little more time on a weekly basis to write versus just respond to email or chat? And then the W of GROW is will. What are you committed to doing and in what time frame? And this makes it really concrete and action oriented. And this is what you can then bring to a manager or your team lead is, hey, can you help me with these specific things? So I've already done this assessment. I've already got a game plan, and here's where I might need your help and support. And it's always a lot easier for a manager, maybe they're a new manager, to respond to something that's already put together than to start from scratch if you just walk in and say, like, I'm unhappy and I'm burnt out, right? It's much easier to react to something where it's like, oh, okay, you've thought about it and you've got some options. Let's brainstorm. Let's partner on this.
Love it. Kenji, anything else?
For me, I would just say just the one simple step is just, if they're not having a conversation with you, bring the conversation to them. If you have your monthly one-on-ones or whatever it is, whatever's the best platform, I think it's a good time to raise it. As managers, we're people too, and some of us are burnt out, obviously, based on the poll. So we might not be looking out for the best interest of everyone, and we might need that check sometimes, like, hey, we need to talk about this, and it's good because it might have been something that just slipped past my radar, and I think it's a good thing to bring up. If anything, if it doesn't solve it right then and there, it'll create more constructive conversations over time, I think.
Awesome. Love both of the examples. I think, just having the courage to kind of get your thoughts together, have a little bit of a plan, and bring it to your manager or to someone who will listen, right? If you don't have access to them. But I think those are all great advice. So now we're going to open it up for questions. So let me.
Yeah, I think we've already got at least 5 in the Q&A.
Yeah, exciting. Let me open it up. Cool, awesome. So Anne, here's a question for you. Could you share some examples of how you have brought in more happy customer moments? Any good stories from some of your past roles? This is from Bailey.
Yeah, thanks, Bailey. That's such a great question. I think part of it is just making it a priority as leadership or management to look for those stories and then share them. And sharing could be as simple as sharing in Slack. We had a great one that we just shared recently at Guru. We had a customer who was changing jobs, and she sent a thank you into one of our awesome support folks, June, and just told June she was leaving her job and thank you for all the amazing things June had done. And so we shared it in Slack, we shared it at our town hall. So part of it is just a culture of like looking out for those moments and then amplifying them. I imagine you're probably getting lots of praises and kudos, whether it's in social media or directly in the chat channels that customers are reaching out to your support team in. And so just making sure you take time to capture those and share them, I think is the most important kind of cultural thing to do.
Love it. Kenji, do you have any examples of happy moments recently? Just curious.
Yeah, I mean, pretty similar. We do the same thing. We have that Slack shout out channel, which is great because I have, fragmented teams. We have a team in Paris and San Francisco. So it's even more important for us because we're so far away to share these little wins and, comments that we get from customers. And I think the most recent one was, it wasn't me, but it was someone on my team, Tina, who was walking down the street. I think she was getting out of her Lyft or Uber. And then somebody tapped her on the shoulder and was just like, "Oh, you work at Front. You guys are great." And then just darted off. And she was like, "Whoa, that was cool," but unexpected. But things like that, like those little stories really keep us going and inject a little energy to our day.
I love it. So I have a question from Lena, and she says her head is looking to restructure the team into tier 1 and tier 2 roles, and she's foreseeing that tier 1 members may experience burnout faster, right? Do we have any advice on how to help relieve this from happening so quickly? As of now, she is doing one project every day, or one project every 2 weeks to help with this. But she thinks, there might be some quick wins, or that people might be bored with these quick wins or easy question kind of exercises, and wants to make sure that she's preventing this tier 1 group from having that feeling of being burnout.
Yeah, tier 1's usually takes the bulk of it, right? So I think if there's any way that you can just, even if it's 10, 15 minutes a day, like get some non-queue time built in so that they can have that break so that you can, focus on other things. I think that's ultimately what's going to lead to burnout. If you're just doing traditional, customer facing tier 1 support, and you're doing that all day and you don't have, enough breaks, enough things to, get your creative juices flowing, do that enough. It'll definitely build up. So I think you're on the right track with thinking about, these projects and things like that. One thing that came up earlier that we were talking about was if you're getting really good feedback from your team, that, hey, I think we're getting close to burning out, or I think this could be improved. Like that's a great team activity right there. Just go grab a room, talk about that, surface it, get some great ideas, and then you have this whole collaboration going on and you're working on it together to fix it. And I think that'll help.
Yeah, I think Kenji brings up such good points around a lot of the burnout for tier 1 is repetitive, right? In Lena's question, it's repetitive and then people get bored. And so how can you think about being creative with the role? Things that I've seen done well in the past is having some folks in charge of triage. So, and then you get faster pattern recognition around, well, what are the major issues coming into tier 1? And then are there ways to prevent them, right? Can you get information out to customers before they have to reach out? And so that may be, as Kenji said, like work on your help center, work on knowledge-centered support, and have teams or, to kind of people tag team to build that out, ultimately to reduce that repetition. But part of it is just making sure you're tapping into the creative, all the creative resources on the team versus just having people in transactional types of roles.
Right. Love it. So we have 2 different questions that are very similar, but so I'm kind of going to group them together. But it's basically saying, when you have a support team that is experiencing burnout, or it may be a small team, right, of 3 to 4 people, what are some strategies to have your senior leadership, recognize that this is a problem, but also invest more into that team, especially when resources and staffing needs are super tight? So either of you, whichever one feels.
When resources are tight, is that the?
Yeah, when resources are tight, how do you get buy-in from your leadership team to invest more in support? If you know that the way to like improve their experience is to potentially hire more people, or maybe invest more in them in some way financially.
Yeah, that's an important one, and also speaks to a couple different issues. One is just how do you make sure there's 2-way conversation between support and your leadership team Is there an advocate at the leadership table who really is speaking on behalf of support? If there's not, how to make sure, like lobby for one. But the other thing I think can be super effective is making sure as a support organization, you know what the top 2 to 3 strategic initiatives or metrics or goals are that your executives are trying to hit. And more often than not, support has an absolute direct impact on that. So it could be revenue growth, it could be customer retention, it could be launching a new product in a new market. Support is part of making sure all of those happen. And so part of it is a simpler way to say it is like know how to kind of speak to what's important to the leadership team and translate what support's doing to directly support that. And that's often the best way to open up the conversation around resourcing, time, personnel, training, or any of that, if you tie it directly back to those strategic initiatives.
Yeah.
Love it.
That's great. And same thing. I think if you're managing, and I've done this, you manage a small team of 3 or 4. I think if you're a 4-person team, there's probably a good chance that you're also in the queue and you're probably feeling that same burnout. So I like to use that context too. When I was managing a smaller team and we were burnt out because way too much of my time was helping with, I love helping customers, but also like I want to do everything else that I can do for my team. But I found myself getting pulled more and more in that direction. And for me, that was a signal to tell the executive team, like, hey guys, like if you really want me to focus on growing out the team more, the only way that's going to happen is if we grow the team. Because right now I'm doing X, and I'm not saying that this position would work for a lot of people, but if this is you, if you have a small team of 3 or 4 and you're working in the queue, maybe too much or more than you're used to, that's probably a good signal that you're understaffed and you could be focusing on bigger visionary things.
Love it. So as a follow-up and to your kind of comment around having support sit next to the product and engineering teams, there's a question kind of from Alex around how you support differing needs of these 2 groups, right? So specifically, their support folks are used to a bit of noise and background, where engineers are, trying to minimize the sound and can't, wear noise canceling headphones. So kind of how you breach, the potential like sort of cultural norms of each of those groups, so that they are like necessarily like collaborating and working together if they are sitting next to each other.
Yeah, that's a great question on sort of different norms and working behavior. So a couple of ideas. Part of it, I'm just a big believer in like testing things and trying them and getting feedback and then iterating. And so one option might be more of a concept of what we would call like hot desks. So drop-in desks where maybe it's the same time each week or a couple times each week where support is sitting there. And so then engineering and product kind of knows, hey, on Tuesdays and Thursdays at this time, these couple hours, support's going to be sitting with us. And part of it is sort of asking engineers and product folks, what will work? Can you join their weekly stand-ups when you hear what they're planning? And can you give feedback on that? If they do demo days on Fridays, can you join that? And again, have that lens of customer feedback or customer view. So part of it, I think, is like opening up the conversation and then trying different things to see, what you can get into a good cadence on.
Love it. Awesome. Another question we have from Emma is around sharing and highlighting positive feedback. So she says members of her team have self-deprecating sense of humor, and sometimes it gets in the way of sharing genuine feedback and compliments because they poke fun of one another and oftentimes themselves. It seems harmless, and I think it comes from a place of trying to lighten the mood when things are tense or customers are being mean to us. But I'm concerned about the way it's progressing. How do I combat this to promote positive feedback?
That's a tough one. That's a good question.
Yeah.
Yeah. I guess if the channel is, if you're using a Slack channel, for example, and it's specifically created for like sharing wins and sharing positive things, and maybe that's just like a conversation you have, with the team. Like, the etiquette for this is like we have channels for, for these kind of things, but we really want to just like highlight like the wins, that we're getting from our customers and the great things customers are saying. that would be my recommendation based on that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think of feedback, both constructive feedback, as well as even compliments. Is It's a muscle we have to build. It doesn't always come naturally, so practice is so important. And giving teams what I think of as like a shared language and framework is also really important. So highlighting when feedback is delivered well, when it's actionable and specific. Maybe having norms around, constructive feedback or growth opportunities are delivered one-on-one in private. Positive feedback is shared across the team. And then as a manager or lead, it's like highlight all the good examples, right? The more you're promoting kind of effective, good examples and sharing stories, the more people will pick up on, hey, this is the way to do it. But encouraging practice and encouraging, like, we're going to make mistakes when we deliver feedback, but if we're all helping each other, then we'll do it more. So I know one thing we just introduced at Guru, and it's just such a great model, is a book called 15 Commitments of Conscious Leadership. So there's a book, there's training, but really what it gives all of us is like a common language and framework.
Love it.
I also recommend that book.
Yeah.
One small thing that actually comes from my 8th grade learnings that I thought was really cool. One of my teachers did this thing when people weren't really necessarily giving each other feedback, where you wrote someone's name on the top piece of paper and then you passed it around the room and everyone had to write something positive about them, but then fold it over so the person after them couldn't see what the other person wrote. And so sometimes it may be like vocally people are joking around, but if you actually have to write it down, it might be a little bit more hard to be, to be funny. And it was really cool at the end. Everyone gets their paper back and they have all of this like really great praise about themselves. And it's really cool to see the trends and like the words people use. And you can have it all as one big sheet of paper. So that's just like a really something from 8th grade that I'm bringing to the webinar today. Cool. So we'll maybe have time for 2 more questions. One question is, we talked about how to advocate for yourself and for your team. Any tips kind of around, when your tenure is somewhat short, maybe you have you're early in your career, is there a good time to bring up career growth without, being too premature?
Yeah, I think it's always a good time to bring it up. For me personally, I have that conversation on the 2nd week. So after the product trainings and stuff's done,
Mm-hmm.
actually do an engagement kind of template. And what I tell my team is, I don't expect you to fill this out today, maybe not even 3 months or 6 months from now, but I just want you to know to have this. And it's basically just a matrix of like, this is what I would like to do in X amount of years. And here's the skills that I have, and here's the skills that I would need, and here's how I would kind of score myself. So I do it really early. Again, I feel like I want to be transparent with my team and show that there's so many options to grow. And that's probably true at most companies, and especially tech companies. But I think there's, early is a good time to do it. Bring it up as soon as you feel like you're comfortable doing it. And I'm sure only good can come from it.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah, plus 100 on the, like, it's never too early. I think just a quick point is it's separating the difference between career growth in terms of just like learning and more experiences, better communication, dealing with conflict, like all those things are part of career growth, and separating that from a promotion, right? There's paths to increased responsibility, but we can be growing every day and every week. And so identifying where you want to improve professionally, you should start that conversation as soon as possible.
Awesome. So that's our time. And there's a lot of other really good questions. And what we'll definitely do is make sure that we answer these questions and send out the Anne and Kenji's responses to them as well in our follow-up, so that everyone gets their questions answered. The last thing we want to remind everyone is that the attendees at today's webinar were all entered into a drawing for a ClassPass gift certificate. So we'll let you know. And that is a really great way to prevent burnout, is to get some exercise and get out of, try something new. So thank you so much, Anne and Kenji, for your time today. I learned a ton. I hope other people did as well. And thank you everyone for joining us. And hopefully you have some actionable items that you can take back to your team or even to your own role to prevent burnout within your own company and potentially other people's companies as well. So.
Thank you so much. And hope everybody takes a moment to take care of themselves, given the response to the burnout question. So
for sure.
Here for you.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much.